Hello and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. Are you bogged down by having to manually manage data access controls, repeatedly move and copy data, and create audit reports to prove compliance? How much time could you save if those tasks were automated across your cloud platforms? Immuta is an automated data governance solution that enables safe and easy data analytics in the cloud. Their comprehensive data-level security, auditing, and de-identification features eliminate the need for time-consuming manual processes, and their focus on data and compliance team collaboration empowers you to deliver quick and valuable data analytics on the most sensitive data to unlock the full potential of your cloud data platforms. Learn how they streamline and accelerate manual processes to help you derive real results from your data at dataengineeringpodcast.com/Immuta, that's IMMUTA, and get a 14-day free trial. And when you're ready to build your next pipeline or want to test out the projects you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out our friends over at Linode. With their managed Kubernetes platform, it's now even easier to deploy and scale your workflows, or try out the latest Helm charts from tools like Pulsar, Pachyderm, and Dagster. With simple pricing, fast networking, object storage, and worldwide data centers, you've got everything you need to run a bulletproof data platform. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Linode, that's LINODE, today and get a $60 credit to try out a Kubernetes cluster of your own. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. Your host is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Manav Mital about the challenges involved in securing your data and the work that he is doing at Cyral to help address those problems. So Manav, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Manav Mital, the founder CEO of Cyral. Cyral is the first of its kind cloud native solution that makes it easy to observe, control, and protect the data cloud. Cyral intercepts all activity across all your data repositories, applies granular access controls, and stops anomalous behavior, all with zero impact on performance.
And do you remember how you first got involved in the area of data management?
Oh, yeah, of course. So there was an early big data startup back in the day, which I joined in 2008, shortly after graduating from school. The name of the company was Aster Data. It was eventually acquired by Teradata, and that's where I met my co-founder and CTO of Cyral, Srini. So that's where both of us got our start in data management, databases, data warehousing. And after Aster was acquired, we followed different paths, but we landed together again here at Cyral, protecting data management systems this time.
And so you mentioned that at Cyral, you're working to help with managing security and observability of data resources in cloud environments. I'm wondering if you can give a bit more of a description about what you're building there and what motivated you to build the business focused on those aspects of data security in the cloud specifically.
Sure thing. So what we've seen in the last few years that prompted us to build Cyral, Tobias, was the emergence of this data cloud. So all the operational data, all the business intelligence data, the system of record type data that companies used to host in their databases, their data pipelines, their data warehouses, we're seeing all of this data move to the cloud, where it now lives in services like Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, S3, and gets analyzed using tools like Looker, like Tableau, and gets processed using tools like Fivetran, Databricks, Kafka, etc. And these are all now different third-party SaaS services where the crown jewels of every organization live. And this adoption of data cloud has made things very simple, very manageable, very agile for engineering teams, data engineering teams, DevOps teams. Businesses benefit from it in lots of different ways. However, it has really complicated things for security teams. And we saw an opportunity to build a tool that really made it easy and simple for security teams to guarantee better security and better overall manageability over all this data splattered everywhere in the data cloud. And that's why we built Cyral. It's an interesting anecdote, actually. The name Cyral is derived from a word in my native tongue, Saral, which means simple. And that was our North Star, that the cloud is making everybody's life simple, and we should leverage these same trends and these same constructs to make it very simple for security teams to collaborate with their peers and secure their data.
And in terms of the data resources specifically, what is it about cloud environments that introduces so much complexity in terms of being able to maintain the security of those resources? And what are some of the common issues that arise when trying to work with databases or object stores or data lakes or data warehouses in cloud environments?
So there's two issues which are at the core of it. One has to do with accessibility, and the other one has to do with tooling. And let me explain both. So if you're a traditional large enterprise, right, like think of a large bank, they would have, thousands of people in their IT and technology department, and very few, a very small number of them would actually know where the database is, right? And now fast forward to this new world where all the assets, all the applications, everything is moving to the cloud. You just have to know the name of the bank to know where their database is in Snowflake, where is it in BigQuery, et cetera, et cetera. These data repositories have become a lot more accessible, and that was by design. That was to enable data democratization. That was to enable agility for application development. But what that does is it takes away these various different layers of defense that had been implemented in front of these databases and data warehouses that are now irrelevant to them. And that increases the propensity with which this data can be breached and this data can be stolen. So that's one, Tobias. The second one, like I said, has to do with tooling. And companies are moving to the cloud. They're adopting their DevOps team, development team, they're adopting infrastructure as code models for development and deployment. And the goal of all this is to be iterate very quickly on the application design, the development, how they want to set up their infrastructure stack, how they want the different services to talk to each other. And historically, security teams used to come after the fact that once the engineering and IT team set up a deployment in place, they would come in and they would kind of put all the security controls and policies in place to make sure it cannot be compromised. But now the cycle time of this deployment is several orders of magnitude faster. And that makes it really, really hard for the security teams to keep pace with the engineering and IT teams working in the cloud. And that's the other piece of this problem.
And in terms of the breakdown of responsibilities for security of the resources and provisioning of them, and the data engineers who are working on populating information into and out of these systems, how does Cyral help with unifying those different roles and responsibilities to align them along being able to ensure that the databases and data warehouses are operational and easy to deploy and maintain and interact with, while also still being able to maintain the necessary security elements of things like encryption and TLS and auditability?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, Tobias. What we saw was a very latent need for truly enabling security to be a shared responsibility between the development, the DevOps, the IT, and the security teams. And what they lacked, or still lack actually, are the right tools and the right processes around which they can collaborate. And that has been a general area of investment and innovation for a lot of different companies that are attacking it at the application layer, some at the infrastructure layer, some at the code scanning layer. And we are taking the same approach, but to the data cloud, where any application, any service, any user that wants to talk to a database or a data warehouse or a data pipeline, we can help secure that interaction and that communication. And the way we enable that is we have kind of, we are championing this methodology called security as code. And the idea here is just like you're using infrastructure as code based workflows for an application and infrastructure deployment, you can use a security as code model for deploying all your security tools, all your security policies, all your governance constraints into the same workflow. So as the engineering, dev, and IT teams release new applications or upgrade their infrastructure or change their deployments, the security controls stay in place in lockstep with all those changes. And that is what really enables companies to adopt our solution very quickly and roll it out very quickly.
In terms of organizations that already have deployed resources, they've got databases running either on dedicated virtual machines, or they're using something like RDS or Google Cloud SQL, or they've already got a large amount of data in various S3 buckets, how do they go about using something like Cyral to be able to identify those resources and the information that they contain and be able to apply appropriate security policies to those existing resources?
A lot of these companies that we are working with, Tobias, we're actually catching them at the right point, right? Like 3 years ago, if I came on this podcast and threw around the word data cloud, very few people would actually understand it, right? 3 years ago, if I went outside of a few select pockets and threw the term Snowflake, they would not understand that I'm referring to a cloud based data warehouse. And just in the last 1 year, all these models, all these tools, all these solutions have literally caught on fire. And so the larger enterprises that we work with, they're all at this point either just beginning to move to the data cloud or just planning to move to the data cloud in a pretty big way, and that is where we start working with them. So for all the legacy databases and data warehouses that they have, which are on-prem or kind of, that have been deployed and secured using their existing investment, they're happy with that. They work with us to deploy this next generation, this new architecture of these data engineering components that they're deploying. Did I answer your question, Tobias?
Yeah, I think the main thing I was driving at is just whether the sort of complexity arises from existing resources and being able to discover them. And if the primary issue that you're seeing is around sprawl of data and how it's being propagated across different systems, then you don't necessarily have the visibility of that. Or if it's for people who are deploying resources and they want to ensure that there is an appropriate amount of security applied at the time of creation.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So the way to think about it is there's a lot of sprawl, like you use the word, at the data layer, where companies would be using different kinds of databases, different kinds of data warehouses, different teams inside the same organization, the same company would be using different stacks for accessing, managing, manipulating, analyzing the data. And what we have taken an approach is that we are going to embrace all these tools and all these different repositories and work uniformly across them. And it sounds very audacious and very grandiose, but the key insight here is because we are focused on these data repositories, there's like a small set of grammars, right? Very small set of grammars that we have to be effective for, which gives us a very wide coverage across all the different components in a typical customer's data stack. And now with Cyral, when they think of security policies, when they think of access control policies, they can almost forget about whether behind the scenes it's a MongoDB or whether it's Snowflake or whether it's S3. They just think in terms of information types. Like, for example, if it's an e-commerce company, they would say that, look, the really valuable information for me is credit card data associated with my customers or their name and their shipping address. And regardless of where it is, I want only these people inside the organization to be able to access it. And only under these circumstances should an application be able to query them. And Cyral takes care of that diversity, that heterogeneity in a very uniform way.
And as far as the types of security issues that you're seeing, what do you see as being the most problematic or potentially damaging for organizations as they bring their data workloads to the cloud, either from on-premise installations or just natively deployed there in the first place? And some of the common points of confusion or lack of understanding as to the impacts of what they're building and the particular settings that they need to take advantage of and maintain observability for.
A really big issue that they see is, when they move to the cloud, oftentimes that transition to bias will be driven by agility, right? That they want to really invest in a very modern microservices based application. It's going to be all deployed using infrastructure as code. And that's driven by a lot of different business reasons, right? It could be digital transformation. It just because could be, they want to really enable data democratization. Companies say that data is the new oil, and the way we are going to really extract value out of it is by putting it on the fingertips of everybody in the organization, whatever the drivers may be. They end up with a very fast changing technology stack where application services, oftentimes databases also, they spin up, they do something, then they spin down. A lot of these services become ephemeral. So across the board, these companies invest a lot in observability. They make sure that they're collecting traces and logs and metrics from everywhere from all the different systems and components that they have deployed in the cloud. And recently, if you've seen, right, like investment in tools like Datadog, like SignalFX, Splunk, etc., they've like really shot up because of this particular reason. However, when it comes to their databases, their data warehouses, their data pipelines, there is no good, easy, simple ways for them to even log that information. And like for example, in a database that your application is talking to, if you turn on logging, it really sinks the performance of the database, which has a downstream impact on the performance of all your applications, all your infrastructure, right? He's getting very basic observability out of your database, out of your pipelines, and all these systems is very hard. And it starts from there. Because if you can't really see what's going on, then protecting it, securing it, managing it becomes that much harder. And that's one of the big drivers of adoption of Cyral with our customers.
And so in terms of Cyral itself, can you talk through the way that the platform is architected and what's involved in actually adding it to an existing environment and integrating with data sources like databases or object storage?
Yeah, so at Cyral, like I said earlier, one of the North Stars, a North Star for us is simplicity, right? We want to build a service which is very ergonomic in nature, very simple to deploy, easy for the teams to adopt. And the underlying technology that we have built, which enables, which powers all of this, is what we call stateless interception. It allows us to intercept requests to any kind of a SQL database, NoSQL database, data warehouse, data pipeline without impacting performance or scalability. And this interception service is something that customers run locally in their own environment. We call it a sidecar. The sidecar runs locally. It intercepts requests to any kind of a data endpoint that they may have on-prem in the cloud as a third-party SaaS service. And all application, service, user, tool requests get routed through this sidecar. Cyral provides a SaaS-based control plane from which a customer can see all the sidecars deployed in their environment, and centrally then they can manage what kind of policies they want to enforce on who can access what data or get observability metrics routed from the sidecar to the favorite tool of their choice. And because it's this sidecar is a very simple containerized service, customers are able to deploy it almost however they like. Some customers deploy it as a Kubernetes service. Some of them kind of run it as a self-managed hosted service in their own cloud. Some customers deploy it using Terraform, CloudFormation. We've seen all kinds of deployments for it.
And I know that cloud native has often been associated with Kubernetes and that that's one of the driving factors in that overall space and containerization. What are the challenges for organizations who haven't already adopted things like Kubernetes in terms of being able to keep up with the rate of change as far as being able to get databases deployed and maintained and keeping them up to date and being able to leverage something like Cyral if they're just using the sort of previous generation of cloud management tools like Terraform and Ansible or SaltStack or something like that versus fully leveraging the capabilities of container orchestration?
Kubernetes, container orchestration, they certainly complicate the problem organizations already have with visibility and with security. But even if you take all of that away, right, and we think only about accessibility, there's like a customer that we are working with that has been growing really, really fast. They are very heavily invested in data analytics. They run their data warehouse in Snowflake, and every week they would have people joining the organization who would get access to Snowflake, right? And then, because a lot of what this company does is analysis of their existing consumers' data and figure out how to best engage them and what kind of offers to present in front of them. All sorts of data ends up in Snowflake, and most of the organization has access to that data. And at some point, it ended up becoming a big concern for the CTO that, look, I'm reasonably sure that we have good hygiene in terms of what data will end up in Snowflake and what type of applications and services are accessing what kind of are transmitting what kind of information to Snowflake. However, he still wanted assurance and visibility and some guarantees that data will not be misused and PII information will not be visible to any user by accident. And this has almost nothing to do now with Kubernetes. This has just to do with general rate of change, where there's a cloud-based data warehouse, namely Snowflake in this case, and a very fast number of people with a rapid clip are getting access to it, and the workload and their analytics workload is changing with a fast rate. And even in that kind of a scenario, Cyral can be extremely useful, where all requests are monitored by Cyral, and it can help organizations like these make sure that data is never inappropriately accessed, even if by accident.
And that brings up an interesting point, too, as far as how to effectively prevent things like leakage of PII when you don't necessarily know what is contained in a given data repository, particularly for things like Snowflake or S3, where anybody can land semi-structured or unstructured data into that source. How do you prevent the leakage of PII when you don't necessarily know what the schema is going to be ahead of time, or what the sort of rules will be for eliding a given record when it's not clear upfront what exists in the data set?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, right? And this is exactly why you need a solution that works seamlessly across all data repositories. So what will happen in a typical organization, there will be some tribal knowledge, if you will, around what data is sensitive and where is it stored. The challenge is that data will be living in some database. It will then move to S3. From S3, it will move somewhere else. Then it will land in Snowflake. Then somebody will read the data, push it somewhere else. And very quickly, people lose control over where the data is going, where it has landed. And it is impossible to express any kind of governance policies at the application layer or in a disaggregated way, saying that, look, this will be the governance policy for this database, or this will be the governance policy for this tool. You have to think more fundamentally. You have to think about it in terms of the data itself. And that is exactly what Cyral enables. So, what customers will do is they will say, okay, let's put Cyral in front of a few data repositories. Now we understand what the PII data is, where is it stored, what the structure is. And once Cyral starts seeing all the interaction, we can very quickly inspect all the different data flows, help customers map out where the data is, where is it flowing. And very soon, they start getting a lot of confidence in their own assessment of where the data is flowing across the organization. And then they can start putting in policies that, look, it's okay if a developer comes in and spins up a new database in AWS and has an application talking to the database and pulling in data from somewhere else to populate the database. However, for this dev test type thing, there is under no circumstances he should be reading PII information about our customers. And that is where Cyral is very valuable.
The other thing is for the case where you do know what the schema is ahead of time and you map out the fields that need to be elided for particular roles, how do you address things like schema updates and being able to identify when those underlying columns or table structures change so that the rules that you have defined up front are no longer going to be valid and need to be updated? And how do you raise that awareness for people who are managing that infrastructure?
Yeah, so there's two ways that we help with this. One is, again, we enable our customers to think in terms of data types, right? So a customer says that, look, the information that I really care about could be somebody's age, it could be somebody's phone number, and it could live in this column, or it could live in this field, or it could live in this bucket. And that schema, of course, you're right, it could be changing all the time. So first of all, the policies are defined on these information types. Then for the enforcement of these policies, because it's a security as code approach, we stay in line with all requests going to a data endpoint as the applications and the underlying schema and all that information is evolving. To update the schema, for example, the way customers use us, for example, is if if they see a service or a human being or a DBA update a schema or create a new table, they want to be flagged off about it. And then they start tracking that new schema or that new column or that new table that was created. And then you can start inspecting the data which is showing up over there. And if the data is coming in from what used to be some sensitive data that you had tagged, then all of a sudden you know that you need to automatically extend your policies and your visibility and your constraints to that new data location as well. And that's how Cyral helps customers to constantly stay on top of their evolving data models and these schemas and tables and whatnot.
Today's episode of the Data Engineering Podcast is sponsored by Datadog, a SaaS-based monitoring and analytics platform for cloud-scale infrastructure, applications, logs, and more. Datadog uses machine learning-based algorithms to detect errors and anomalies across your entire stack, which reduces the time it takes to detect and address outages and helps promote collaboration between data engineering, operations, and the rest of the company. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Datadog today to start your free 14-day trial. And if you start a trial and install Datadog's agent, they'll send you a free t-shirt. And going back to the concept of sprawl, where before I was talking about the pre-existence of various different sources of data and locations that they might be residing, the other aspect of sprawl is where you have a well-known place where most of your data is being located, and then you're building various reports or data extracts, and those get sent to different people and then copied into things like Excel. How does Cyral help with identifying or mitigating or removing the need for that type of sprawl where the different elements of data are being copied into multiple different locations that you don't necessarily know how they're being maintained or if they're being kept up to compliance with any sort of regulatory or security regimes?
This has to do with basic visibility. I was talking to a CISO recently, right? And he had a really interesting perspective on this. And it was that, look, let's just focus on solving even the most simple problems that are the highest bang for the buck. And all these super complicated problems we'll get to later. The challenge that we have, that a lot of these security leaders have, that there's no tools even for solving simple problems, right? And let's take this Excel scenario as an example, right? Let's say if you have a company which is hosting a bunch of data in their database and they're partnering with other companies, and their partner and an employee in one of their partner organization wants to hook up into the database and pull data out for Excel, right? Today, it's hard for companies to answer a very basic question, that which employee in which partner access for data. There's just no way for them to do that, right? In a lot of cases. And this is where Cyral can be helpful, where we can sit in front of all this activity and then hook up into their identity provider and give them real-time visibility that who is accessing what data. And then they can implement some very simple policies saying that, look, I have a gold partner, and a gold partner, if there's some analyst, he should be able to read data, but only one that is relevant to that partner. They should not be able to read data that belongs to another partner, and show me exactly all the data that has been read. Another way where this becomes valuable is now you can see that based on attributes of different users, what type of data have they been reading. For example, if you see that your support engineers are reading data generally between morning 8 a.m. to evening 6 p.m., but at midnight some support engineer decided to read data associated with one specific individual, even though there was no case or issue attached to triggered against that user for that time period, that quickly becomes a red flag. So just by providing this visibility to buyers, you can a lot of issues and nip them in the bud before you end up on the front page of the newspaper that, look, 100 million user records are stolen or 200 million credit card records are stolen. This is what we enable security leaders and organizations to do.
To your point, too, about the data breaches and unauthorized access to large volumes of data, a lot of that has to do with things like S3 or other object storage platforms where the security controls aren't properly configured. Does Cyral provide any way to gain insight into that, where you can say, here are the buckets where I have information stored, and then being able to use the cloud APIs to introspect what the security policies are and determine whether the access is too permissive and what other systems are being used to read and write data to and from that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So we can certainly help with that. In fact, if you think of, like data governance frameworks, right? Data governance frameworks typically have different aspects to them. One big pillar is discovery, right? Finding out where all my data is, what are the different data sources that I have, where are they kept. Another one is classification, which classifies your data into, one or many different kinds of categories. And depending on the category, you can assign severity and policies around who can access how much of the data under what context, etc. Right? And then there's another one, a very important one, which is access control, right? That now you understand where the data is, what type of data it is. In real time, you have to enforce access control to that data. And that is what is unique and special about Cyral. We are able to sit in line to all requests and implement that access control. And because we are seeing all this activity, now we can integrate with other tools that companies may be using for classification or cataloging or discovery, or we can just start from there and help them build that out. And most importantly, whether they build this something themselves or they use a third party solution or use us for that, we can make sure that it's kept up to date because we don't require our customers to do offline scans and discovery anymore because all the activity is now in front of them at their fingertips. We can make sure their catalogs and discovery engines are always kept up to date.
Another element of the challenge of being able to build something like this, where you are monitoring access and gaining observability into the interaction patterns of these systems, is the variance in APIs that exist for different data sources. So I'm wondering how you decided which platforms to prioritize as you were building out Cyral, and what are some of the systems that you found to be most challenging to work with?
As we were starting Cyral, we were building the first of its kind of product, right? Like it's when most of the customers that we work with, this is a new spend or a new budget item for them, right? We're not replacing something that existed before. The big bet that we made, Tobias, was, as companies move to the cloud, they are going to use these cloud native, cloud first, cloud friendly data repositories like Snowflake, like BigQuery, like MongoDB Atlas, etc., etc. So for our first cut for going to the market, we that's the set of data repositories that we prioritized. And call it luck, call it foresight, it actually worked out really well for us because most of the customers that we work with, that we discover, 90% of their workload involves these early repositories that we had decided to undertake. And as the company has been growing, we kind of, try to stay very close to our customers, very determined to solve their most pressing needs. And then, of course, we keep on adding coverage for new types of repositories or tools that they want us to be effective for. So that's the strategy that we've taken.
As far as your interactions with your customers and as you are building out the product and figuring out which directions to take, what are some of the biggest security challenges that organizations are dealing with, or the things that are most likely to keep them up at night and lead to potentially large breaches or issues with breaking compliance regimes?
Yeah, so there's two big areas, two big vectors broadly in terms of how we think of designing and prioritizing a solution and in terms of the needs for our customer that we tackle. One is adoption of the data cloud, where companies, a lot of companies for the first time having their like really sensitive, mission critical, company critical data in a data repository where where they cannot put their arms around the infrastructure around the server where the data is stored, right? And this data is being analyzed using third party SaaS tools like Looker, like Tableau, all other such similar tools. And there is basically no control that these organizations have on the data which is flowing from one repository to a tool and back, right? So that's an area of concern that a lot of security and technology and CIO leaders have inside organization that we focus on. And the other one is around agility and simplicity of deployment. You can solve the grandest challenges if you don't get overwhelmed by them. And that's how we approach this. That look, this data protection, heterogeneity of data, applications spinning up and down, data flowing from one place to another, it seems like a really daunting problem. But by really being maniacally focused on building a product which is simple to use, simple to deploy with very intuitive workflows, that's how we are enabling customers to step up and solve these issues.
And as far as the challenges that you're facing, or some of the most interesting or unexpected lessons that you've learned while building Cyral, what are the things that stand out most to you?
Well, if you had asked me last year, since you're asking me now, I would say that life can throw any kind of a curveball at you, including a global pandemic. So you have to be agile as hell and responsive as hell to adapt to a changing environment of, customers and investors and employee needs and all that, right? But I suppose I'm not alone in this. Every organization is dealing with it. But really, the most interesting challenge that we had to solve at Cyral was that of education. Like, how do we explain what we are trying to do, the product that we're trying to build, the benefits of this product to an audience that has not used a product like this before? And that is both daunting and fun because we really have to think from first principles. Look, how do I describe the problem? Is data cloud the right word? Is there some other way to capture this? Is security as code the right way to explain how we operationalize that? Or is there a different term? And these have been some of the most fun, yet the most challenging aspects of building Cyral so far. But like I said, we got very lucky that we had the right team and the right market trends behind us, and we were able to come to a place where the Cyral positioning and the Cyral story does actually resonate quickly and easily with most people that we talk to.
Particularly for security engineers who might be familiar with software applications and the traditional access patterns and life cycles of things like maybe a web app, what have you found to be some of the challenges that they're facing and some of the gaps in knowledge and appreciation for the complexity when they are being tasked with understanding what policies to implement and how to manage the overall accessibility and access patterns of these larger repositories of data that have multiple stakeholders and much different access pattern?
No, so they are in a bit of a bind, right? The business is forcing the development, the IT teams to run at the speed of light, right? And the security teams, they are still trying to figure out how to best work out their operating relationship with these teams, how to best interject themselves into their release management processes, how to best communicate with these teams about what are the right sort of policies to be enforced, where should they be enforced, at what frequency will they be updated, who will own that. And these new models, these new cloud native architectures, they've kind of thrown a wrench in the agreement that all these teams had over the last many many decades. And a lot of companies are still trying to figure out that how do we work together, how do we operationalize the security of our cloud or overall cloud platforms in a way that makes sense for everyone so that they can still continue to move fast while making sure that they're just not opening themselves up to some massive breach and something that kind of really erodes the trust of their customers in the business. So that's basically what we're seeing. And again, I don't think this is unique or specific to any particular vertical or any particular segment. And it's a fairly hot topic inside most organizations, and one that we are all collectively trying to figure out from different angles.
And similarly for data engineers who have up to now largely been working in their own silos and maybe not necessarily as directly integrated with security and development teams or the overall operations workflows, what are some of the areas where they're being challenged and some of the gaps in knowledge that they might be presented with as they become more integrated into the responsibility of managing security and compliance of their data?
Typical data engineering team, right? They're just trying their best to stay productive, stay above water, and make sure that they can keep up with growth in both the volumes of the data as the complexity of their own jobs, right? Like they have to support an increasing amount of business use cases that are imposed upon them. They have to continuously adopt the latest technologies that show up in the data processing world and continuously improve their toolkit and sometimes their own skills, go for different certifications, etc., to make sure things are just running smoothly. And they're all very security conscious, but they will often look to the security team for guidance. Okay, what are the best practices to follow over here? What is the right tooling to follow over here? And this is exactly the gap that Cyral helps cover, because ours is a service that can be adopted by these engineering teams, recommended by the security teams, and helps both of them collaborate with each other and make sure that their data stays safe.
And so for teams who are trying to improve their overall security posture and their capabilities to be able to move fast while keeping things appropriately locked down, what are the cases where Cyral is the wrong choice? And what are some of the alternative options for being able to manage this either via in-house tooling or some other types of service?
So a lot of companies that are kind of, working on the more traditional, very on-prem centric workloads, right? And there's still a very large number, one of them. For them, it's not like Cyral is the wrong choice. It's more like Cyral is probably not a pressing need for them. And the reason is because they have a security model that has been working for them for many years, and they're probably have better things to work on. Another scenario is where the sensitive data in the organization is one that lives on file servers or inside some of these cloud storage services like Box and Dropbox, right, which is completely free format, sitting in the form of files used by information workers. That is where Cyral is irrelevant for them as well. But whenever organizations have data which is highly proprietary or very sensitive, which is very core to their business and something which is a competitive advantage for them, which is sitting in these databases, data warehouses, data pipelines accessed by an increasing number of stakeholders in the company, that is where Cyral is really valuable service for them.
Another element of what you're building at Cyral is the question of performance, where you are sitting in line with the data resources, where you need to be able to block requests that aren't allowed or elide certain elements of the data sources or obfuscate things like credit cards. I know that proxies can be sometimes a performance issue. So I'm wondering how you have tackled that particular problem and the issues that you've seen in terms of people who may have had bad experiences with that type of system and trying to encourage them to try out Cyral.
Yeah, so that's a great question. At Cyral, we came up with this technology called Stateless Interception, and it allowed us to build what we call a sidecar, a data layer sidecar. And this is something that can sit in front of your data endpoint, but does not come with the traditional inflexibility, the traditional performance penalties, scalability challenges that you have with proxies, and the manageability issues and applicability restrictions that you get with agents. Really unique and interesting thing that our engineering team came up with, which allows us to intercept requests to any of these databases and data warehouses without impacting performance and scalability. And when we go present our solution to a large enterprise, the security team would obviously be very receptive to something like us. And then we would get introduced to the engineering teams, the data engineering teams. What we saw was they were very interested in our design considerations and how we can be in line without having the traditional challenges that people associated with these proxies, and how it actually further simplified their lives by giving them real-time observability into their database connection pools that they did not have before. That we started getting more and more pull into these accounts as we started working with engineering teams. And what we decided to do, Tobias, to answer the second part of your question, was we just decided to completely embrace this, and we decided to be very open with our overall architecture, our design principle. And if you go to our website, www.cyral.com, in the technology section, you can actually read up how we designed the sidecar and what the key insights are that we applied to kind of do away with this old notion of a proxy and build something which was very new and very lightweight and very effective. So we kind of as opposed to other companies that try to hide their high IP stuff, we actually just put it out there on the web for everybody to read, and the reception for that has been fantastic.
As you continue to build out the platform and try to bring on new customers and support new data systems, what are some of the things you have planned for the future of Cyral, both technologically and from the business side?
For us, what we have seen at Cyral is like a really greenfield opportunity where companies are increasingly moving to data cloud. The engineering teams are increasingly adopting infrastructure as code, and we'll continue to invest in making sure we play well with the various different ecosystem tools that these companies use for data management, for data analytics, for deployment, for orchestration, for monitoring, for log collection, etc., etc. And that's going to be our big focus for a long time to make sure that we play well with these tools and we remain the simplest, the easiest to use security product for these security teams. And I think as long as we keep doing that, there's like a very large untapped market for us to go after.
Well, for anybody who wants to follow along with you or get in touch, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as a final question, I would just like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
See, what I have seen is like data management is the tooling for data management is a very fluid and very rapidly evolving space. Like I said, Srini and my co-founder Srini and I, we started working together in the big data space back in 2008. And in the last 12 years, right, number of tools, the number of companies that have been built and that are still growing up and still coming to the fore, it is a very, very large number of choices that data management, data engineering professionals have today versus 15 years ago, right? Where it was just Oracle, DB2, SQL Server. There were like a few number of players that completely dominated data engineers' headspace. And today there's like so many alternatives in front of them. And a lot of them fairly established and a lot of them that are still just bubbling up. So, can't think of any gap. In fact, I think we are at a point where there's looking at three different alternatives for doing anything that anybody wants, which actually creates the complexity that Cyral is trying to address.
Well, thank you again for taking the time today to join me and discuss the work that you've been doing with Cyral. It's definitely a very interesting project and one that is addressing a particular need for data platforms and data teams because security is something that is and always will be challenging. So I appreciate your efforts to simplify that. So thank you again for taking the time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Tobias, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure coming here, talking to you, and I hope you have a great day as well and have a great weekend.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, podcast.init, at pythonpodcast.com to learn about the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. If you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.